Hi, it's Sherry at Savvy Business Resolutions with another episode of Investing in Conversation, Conflict Management for Managers. Last time, we looked at just two of the elements of our workspaces which can create, aggravate or de-escalate conflict. This time, I'm busting a myth, speaking from experience, and a former radio guest of mine will give you a tip, all about how time can do the same. So we come to this week's myth. If you heard the last show, you know what I'm about to say. Tech lets us work anytime. As with space, technically, yes it does. We can obviously cross time zones in a click. As Lana said in her email, they do that for drinks. And we can stretch and compress and shift our own time around to suit ourselves. But also, as with space, just because we can doesn't always mean we should. Because not all time works equally well for work. Because tech gives us so much flexibility, it's easy to believe that time is now completely elastic. But that is a myth. Every myth needs a hero or a heroine. And the central character in the tale of elastic time is the 24-hour human. This individual can carry on as long as their mobile devices, well, longer in fact, because they don't need to be recharged. They're equally efficient and effective at any time of day or night because they're not bothered by pesky interruptions like needing to eat, drink or sleep. Just one tiny problem. They're closely related to the Bonzo Dog Doodah band's Urban Spaceman. Now, I have to say, I am slightly too young to remember this first time round, but I heard it growing up and I used to love it. If you haven't come across it, it's on YouTube. I'll put the link in the show notes. But it's just over 2 minutes, all about a superhuman being who's absolutely amazing at everything. Friendship, love, even flying. And then you get to the last line. I don't exist. Very silly. But there is a serious point. Of course we know the same is true of his 21st century descendant. But still, globalisation, among other things, has created a 24-hour society and with it, a demand for 24-hour people to populate it. The trouble is, thanks to good old Mother Nature, we are, for the time being at least, still slaves to our circadian rhythms. Last time, we heard from Dr. Jennifer Veitch of the National Research Council of Canada. She was talking about our very subjective relationship with lighting. Back in 2015, she told me about a more general effect of light which no one had known existed until the beginning of this century.
This is a really exciting time to be a scientist who studies light and the effects on people. About 15 years ago, photobiologists confirmed that there is another photoreceptor in the eye in addition to the ones that we are all familiar with, the rods and the cones, that are important for vision. And this photoreceptor detects the presence of light, so the amount of light we're exposed to, and uses that information to control many different bodily functions, the most important or best known of which is regulating circadian rhythms. So having these photoreceptors in the eye tells the body when it's morning and sends the signal that all the morning time things should happen in the body, which means a hormone called cortisol, which tends to wake us up, will start to increase its concentration in the body. And another very important hormone, melatonin, will tend to decrease. So during the day, there's almost no melatonin in the body. And then in the evening, when of course it's starting to get dark, melatonin will start to rise, cortisol will start to fall, and that's a signal for various overnight functions to start in the body. And the presence and absence of light, as detected by these cells in the eye, is what keeps our bodies in what we call entrained to the 24-hour day around us. And nobody knew that it was a separate system from vision before about the year 2000. And this has led us to many interesting scientific discoveries in the years since then, and more and more flooding through every day now.
Jennifer's talking there about potential increased risks of certain types of cancer. I'm not going to get into that in any detail because the research is still ongoing and I am definitely not qualified to analyse the evidence that's available. What I can say with confidence is that Alan is bad for our health. No, not you, Alan. No, please don't turn off. No, I'm talking about artificial light at night. It's an unfortunate acronym, isn't it? That's just one of the things that disrupts our sleep, which disrupts our physical, psychological, and social well-being, and makes a significant contribution to conflict in the process. Professor Matt Walker is a psychologist, neuroscientist, and sleep researcher who I really must get on the programme in the next series. In the meantime, I can highly recommend his YouTube videos, including his TED Talk, Sleep is Your Superpower. I'll put that link in the show notes as well. As he says, we often see sleep as a cost, even a complete waste of time, but it's actually an investment. In fact, it's the biggest investment you can make in your conversations at work, whether they're aimed at managing conflict or not. Okay, I know, whatever device you're using to listen to this, you're looking at it now going, crazy woman's lost it, but I really haven't. The title of this show came out of a quote from Jerry Chandler of Elephant's Child. He's a fellow conflict management and dispute resolution specialist. And he said, if time is money, then time spent on conversation is an investment. Well, the time you spend sleeping is a huge investment in your waking hours. The dividends most relevant to us are the impacts on things like our working memory. This is a memory function which allows us to hold on to information for about 90 seconds to use it for calculations and so on. Also, the impact on our decision making, and the other element, along with time, of conversational investment capital, attention. Episode 4 of this series was called Can I Have Your Attention, Please? And in the blog that ran alongside that, I shared my metaphor for different types of attention investment, different types of lighting. Well, for a long time, scientists thought that attention was a constant spotlight, but they now know it runs in cycles which are tightly bound up with our circadian rhythms. Several studies have shown peaks and troughs over each 24-hour period, although the exact timings of those depend on a number of sort of personal factors like your age, whether you've had enough sleep, and whether you had it at the right time for your chronotype. In other words, whether you're a morning person, an evening person, or any point in between. I developed a working knowledge of this subject when I started studying communication back in 2008. But Matt Walker, who I mentioned just before, has been called the #1 sleep expert in the world. So if you want a more and better detailed explanation, he's your man. I'm going to speak from experience this week about something which I probably should have known about in advance, but I didn't. I'm talking about the cultural aspect of time. You know, we talk about time is money, and we think that time runs in forward-moving lines, don't we, in this country and in the US and beyond. And we assume that's universal. But I learnt the hard way that it isn't. Some years ago, I joined a networking group. It was a great group, which I may actually go back to and I may actually talk about on the next series of the pod. But my introduction didn't exactly go smoothly. See, because of the culture I come from, born and raised in the UK, my fundamental belief is that time is the ultimate finite resource. I mean, there are only 24 hours in every day. And as I was saying in the last section, we all need to spend roughly a third of that sleeping to be healthy. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, we are all mortal. Yeah, sorry to come up with that depressing thought, but it's true. So for me, my belief feels like fact. I can bring evidence to support it. So for a long time, I thought it was obvious. And then I joined this group, and in an introductory chat, I was chatting to one of the people who ran it. And I said this quite casually. Well, of course, time is the ultimate finite resource. And he said, but what if it isn't? I said, but it is. And he said, yeah, but what if it's not? I said, well, what do you mean? And we ended up having a really heated argument about our different concepts of time. And it did not twig, and I'm not proud of this because I'm supposed to be a communication specialist. I'm supposed to be able to bridge distance. And on this occasion, I failed miserably. Truth to tell, I did not make a good job of this because it did not cross my mind that his view of time was shaped by the fact that he had grown up in a different culture. He'd grown up in a culture where time is cyclical. It's underpinned by a belief in reincarnation. And of course, if you believe that we live many lives and not just one, it's logical that, as he put it, there's always enough time to do what we want to do. As I said, at the time, I didn't give his culture a thought. And so the result was that we got off on a really bad footing. I'd like to say that the damage was repaired later. It wasn't, unfortunately, because he was adamant about his position as I was about mine, and never the twain really met. On the upside, I've never forgotten it, and I've never fallen into that hole again. I've also looked out for the same hole in different contexts. So it was a great lesson. It was a tough lesson, but it was a good one. All that said, my personal and professional experience of time is still that it is absolutely limited. I haven't changed on that score. But at least I have become aware that that's my view. It's probably our view in the UK. But if you're listening elsewhere in the world, and I know people are, somewhere like Argentina, Latin America has a much more synchronous culture, you may have a completely different view. Now, I thought I'd share that with you because you may be well aware of cultural differences in attitudes to time. As I said, I wasn't. You may be a step ahead of me. But if you're not, it's one to look out for, because you might be able to cross time zones in a click, but you can't cross cultures at the press of a button. This week's tip takes us back to our myth, and specifically the subject of attention cycles. I'm handing the reins to the final guest on my very first radio series for this one. You sort of heard from Rob Jones of Ultimate Content earlier in this series. When I was talking about the job interview from hell, he was in the background. In this clip, we swap places. Before I play it, a quick statement of the blindingly obvious. What Rob's talking about at the beginning is not the tip. That comes at the end. You'll see what I mean.
We work all weekend long now. We're a sports-driven company,
and most
sport
of that,
happens at the weekend.
Of course it does.
And American sport happens at the weekend and in the middle of the night.
Yes, so, I've noticed that.
So there we are on BBC television at 1 o'clock in the morning on Monday, or Tuesday really? And I'm compelled to wake up at 3 o'clock, have the alarm at 3 o'clock, so I can wake up for half an hour and watch what we're doing.
I'm amazed.
And
you're
then
still
try and go back to sleep again.
Oh no! So somewhere in all that, I know that you were trying to stay fit.
Well, actually, that is the one thing that I have made time for.
Yeah.
I'm now fitter than I've been probably in 15 years.
Wow.
And I go to yoga as many mornings a week as I possibly can, 7 a.m. yoga class. I'm quite evangelical about it. I would recommend it to anybody, but I know it probably doesn't suit everyone.
Sure.
But it suits me, and I'm fitter and less tired and all those things. So that bit is vital. So that's my me time between 7 and 8:30 in the morning.
And that obviously helps the business.
Hope so.
Well, at least if you come into work and you're awake, that's got to help.
Awake's good.
Yeah, I find awake is very useful.
But you have to know when your highs and lows are.
Yes.
And I've always known that around 4 o'clock in the afternoon through till 6 is my low time. So I never make a decision or any kind of commitment after 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
I won't ask you to commit to anything, as it's now just after 4. If you've heard this show before, you'll know that I normally try to end with a smile. To be honest, this week it's more of a confession. You've just heard a clip from the finale of my first radio series. Now, here's how I opened that show.
Hi, it's Sherry. It's just after 3 on a Thursday afternoon, and it's the last time I'm going to say that means it's time for another Enterprise Gateway. Yep, 2 years and a couple of months and a couple of weeks, and it's been absolute fun. It's been a fantastic privilege to do this show, but today is the last one.
I was saying last time that radio station operated out of a space where our studio walls were those screens that you use in offices to create some privacy. I was completely open and honest with my listeners about the fact that Rob and I had recorded his part of the show in his studio. I said that was because he didn't have time to come down to Essex, which was the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. The fact was, his studios had luxuries like fixed walls and a door you could actually close. And there was something else I forgot to mention. And that was the fact that just after 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon at the top of the shopping centre was actually 7 o'clock in the morning in my study. Yeah, my live intro was also pre-recorded. That's what I call a covert time shift. It's a handy trick, unless you're found out and then you risk losing people's trust. I'm hoping that 12 and a half years is long enough for me to get away with admitting it. I'll talk more about different types of time shifting on the blog. Trust links into next week's programme, actually, which is the penultimate episode in this series. All that's left for me to say on this programme is have yourself a peaceful and productive week, and I'll talk to you next time. If you need help with any aspect of conflict management at work, come and talk to me. All my details are on the website, savvybusinessresolutions.com.